Some people are absolutely terrified of clowns. My uncle Eric is one of them. If you showed up in a clown mask at his door, he would probably cry or pass out. Marlene Warren is not one of those people. She loved clowns. She would paint them, collect clown toys and figurines, and once she was an adult, she would fill her shelves with various clown decorations. Now it's the year 1990, and Marlene is 40 years old. She lives in Wellington, Florida, which is part of Palm Beach County. Marlene lives in a very wealthy neighborhood. Some of the people on Marlene's block have their own private planes, so it's safe to say the Warren family is very well off. She's married to a man named Mike, and that May, her 21-year-old son Joe is staying with her and Mike temporarily. He had recently broken his leg, so he needed to stay at home to recover and have help around the house. Marlene is taking care of him until he can walk on his own and cook and clean up after himself. Something about Marlene is that she had a history of being unlucky in love. She was no longer with her son's biological father, and things were currently getting tense with her husband, Mike. Lately, he was working a lot of late nights and weekends, and he was away from home a lot. Marlene knows that he's not actually that busy with work because they own a company together. It's a used car lot. So Marlene understands exactly how much work Mike has to do when he's seeing customers and how many hours he should be on the clock. But he seems to be gone way more than he should be, and he can't explain what's keeping him busy. So obviously, Marlene suspects that he's having an affair and it's her second husband, but she can't prove it, and he denies it when she asks if he's been cheating. Marlene doesn't believe Mike. She's convinced that he's cheating, except she doesn't want to file for a divorce because it could hurt them financially. They owned a business together, and Marlene fears that if she goes through with a divorce, he will win the house, company, and all assets. Worst case scenario, she loses her job and her investments and is left with nowhere to live and no way to support herself. So, Marlene doesn't really know what to do. She doesn't want to stay with the cheater, but she doesn't think she can really leave him or prove he's cheating. And, to make it worse, it sounds like she might actually be a little bit scared of Mike. I'm not really sure why. There's no records that I could find that he's ever threatened her or physically abused her, but in 1990, she had been making some accusations. During a recent conversation with her mother, she allegedly told her, "If anything happens to me, Mike did it." And she also said something similar to her son, Joe. At some point, Marlene said, "If anything does happen to me, your father did it." And Mike, his stepfather, except Joe refused to believe it. He argued with his mother, insisted Mike wasn't capable of that kind of violence. However, Marlene stood her ground. She said, "Don't put it past him." Joe still didn't believe what she was saying, but from Marlene's perspective, she's in a bad situation and has no clue how to get out of it really, and nobody believes her. Now, on May 26th, Marlene probably isn't thinking about cheating or murder. She's just focused on enjoying time with family and friends. It's relatively early in the morning, and she's having breakfast with Joe and some of Joe's friends. And while they're eating and talking, they see someone approaching the house through one of the windows. It's not just anyone, though. It's a clown holding a bouquet of flowers and a bunch of balloons. The clown costume is pretty baggy, and the face paint makes it almost impossible to tell if the person is a man or a woman, so nobody recognizes them. But given that Joe is recovering from a broken leg, Marlene figures as a clown lover, someone must have sent him the balloons and flowers as a get well soon gift. Marlene is getting up to answer the door before the bell has even been rung. As she's pulling open the door, Joe hears Marlene say, "Oh, how sweet." And This is the last thing he ever hears his mom say, because the moment the doors open, the clown drops the flowers and the balloons. It's when the clown draws a gun and shoots Marlene in the face point blank. Marlene's son Joe sees this entire thing, and he notices something that will be important to the case later on. The clown is relatively tall, around 6 feet, wide framed like a man, and has brown eyes. It's the main thing he notices as he runs to his mom. Joe grabs a phone and calls 911, telling the dispatcher his mom needs help now. He just watched her get shot in the face. His friends rush to the door. They attempt to chase the clown, but they're not quick enough. But they check on Marlene, who is still alive, but barely. Watch as the clown climbs inside a white Chevy and drives away. The clown doesn't even seem to be in much of a hurry, and they're acting relatively casual. Like there's nothing upsetting about the fact they just shot someone in the face. They're walking, not running, and the car pulls away at a relatively normal speed. They're not accelerating in a suspicious manner. Still, the friends don't chase them too far, as they don't know if the person's going to chase them too. So instead, they stay in the doorway and describe the clown's car to Joe, and he tells this information to the dispatcher. The dispatcher says an ambulance and police are on the way, but to Joe, they're not getting there fast enough. The clown just drove away. His mom is dying. So, on his broken leg, Joe tells his friends to stay with his mom, grabs her car keys, and hops in the car. He's driving around trying to find the car the clown was in. His plan is to try and chase after them and somehow stop them from getting away. However, he's too late. He can't see the clown or the car anywhere, and Joe has no idea where they went. Paramedics rush Marlene to the hospital and put her on life support. She is, miraculously, still alive when they reach the hospital, but it's not looking good. Marlene slips into a coma, and doctors are not sure if she'll ever wake up. Eventually, Joe gives up on finding the clown and goes to the hospital to be with his mom. He finds her hooked up to machines and monitors. He tells her he loves her, and begs his mom to open her eyes. By that night, though, there is no improvement. All throughout the next day, Joe sits by his mother's side, but she's still not recovering. And by the third day, doctors encourage Marlene's loved ones to make a choice. They're 99% sure Marlene is never going to wake up. So, Marlene's family decides to pull the plug. She dies May 28, 1990, at the age of 40. Of course, the big question now is who is the clown that killed Marlene, and why? The police dive into the case right away, and find their first major clue relatively quick. They locate a white Chevy Lyron in a parking lot about 10 miles away from Marlene's house. Now, to all appearances at this point, it's abandoned. The investigators can't tell who owns it, and when they search the car, they find bright orange synthetic hairs inside. It's the exact same color and texture as the wig the clown wore at the time of the murder. Now, there's no sign of the actual wig, the clown costume, or murder weapon, but officers assume this must be the same car the killer took to and from the crime scene. And, more importantly, they find human hairs inside the car. DNA testing is very new in 1990, and it'll be very hard, if not impossible, for them to identify a suspect from this sample, but it could still potentially be useful. And, more importantly, they get another step closer to finding a suspect when they hear from a potential witness. A woman named Deborah Offord. Deborah works for a costume shop, and according to her, 2 nights before the murder, so May 24th, a woman walked into her store wanting to buy a clown outfit. Now, this woman arrived just a few minutes before closing, and Deborah was tired. She wanted to go home. So she asked the woman, "Can you just come back tomorrow?" But the customer refused and seemed anxious, like she was in something of a hurry. So, Deborah worked with her to pick out a suit that fit, a wig, a red nose, and some clown makeup. The woman paid in cash, so Deborah didn't even hear her name ever. But now, hearing that a clown murdered someone, she's able to provide a description to police. The customer was 5'11, white, slim, and had long, straight, dark hair and brown eyes. This stood out to police because it partially matches what Marlene's son, Joe, said. He also testified the killer had brown eyes. But aside from that, the descriptions don't match much. Joe said the shooter was taller, over 6 feet, and he thought the killer was large framed and most likely a man. So police aren't sure how seriously to take Deborah's tip. Maybe the woman came in to buy the clown costume and had nothing to do with Marlene's murder. I mean, it could have been pure coincidence. Or perhaps one of the two, Joe or Deborah, is misremembering. Detectives decide they need to learn more. They began questioning Marlene's loved ones, and they soon learn that everyone thinks they already know who the murderer is. All of Marlene's friends and family tell the investigators about her own suspicions about her husband Mike in the time before her death. They say Marlene warned everyone that he might murder her so he'd be free to be with his mistress. She told her own mother and son that. But someone else thinks Mike was planning to kill Marlene. His lawyer. See, about a year before the homicide, Mike and Marlene hired an attorney to help them deal with an unrelated legal matter. One day, the three of them were working together. Marlene had to step out for a bit. At that moment, when Mike was alone with the lawyer, he asked if it would be possible for a husband to inherit his wife's property if he had been the one to murder her. This is a relatively shocking question to ask. However, the lawyer didn't think Mike was sincere and thought he was just curious. He had never given any indication that he disliked Marlene or that they were having difficulties in their marriage. At least none that the lawyer knew about. Maybe he'd watched, true crime recently or liked debating hypothetical legal situations. So, the lawyer actually answered that the husband would inherit everything if he got away with the murder, but if he was convicted, he would get nothing. Mike didn't ask any follow-up questions. However, now that Marlene was murdered, the conversation started to weigh on the lawyer's conscience. He tells the police to look at Mike's finances to see if he might have had a financial motive to kill Marlene. And there's actually a lot of evidence to support this lawyer's suspicions. Mike and Marlene co-owned the used car lot together, but Marlene had a lot of property in her own name. This included apartments and other rentals. She had tenants who paid rent regularly, so she and Mike always had a decent amount of income coming in. In total, all of the property was worth over $1 million. If they divorced, Marlene would have kept it all for herself. Mike probably wouldn't have had any claim to it. He could have fought it, however, now that Marlene's dead, Mike definitely gets all of those assets. This is enough for police to pull him in for questioning, but he denies all accusations. Actually, he tells police he was not having an affair and that Marlene was just paranoid. He also says he has no reason to want her dead because if he's not cheating and he's not thinking about divorce, there's no financial motive. They shared their finances. So as long as their marriage was good, he and Marlene were sharing their wealth. And, more importantly, Mike had a very strong alibi. On the day of the murder, he was at a racetrack with friends. Well, he wasn't actually at the track when Marlene was shot, but he was on his way. He was in a car with several friends, all of whom can verify this. So police don't believe Mike was actually the one to pull the trigger. He was not the one in the clown costume. But they believe he could have been involved still. Maybe he planned the murder or hired someone to commit it. So, investigators keep digging. Eventually, they find proof of Mike committing a crime. Not murder, but he is a dishonest used car salesman. He tampers with vehicles. so they appear to have fewer miles on them. And he's been mishandling company money and using doctored statements when filing taxes. He's also lied to insurance companies about the vehicles he sells. Eventually, Mike is charged with 43 separate counts of fraud. He's found guilty and sentenced to prison. Mike serves his time, and during this time, police are still investigating him for murder and searching for a smoking gun. But they can't find any concrete proof that he was involved with Marlene's death. So, by the end of his fraud sentence, there isn't enough of a case to charge him. Once Mike's free, he begins rebuilding his life. This means that, among other things, he begins dating a woman named Sheila Kian. I apologize if I've butchered the name. Now, Mike and Sheila have known each other for years, since before the fraud conviction. She used to work with him at the used car lot, and had been hired just 5 months before Marlene's murder. So she and Mike hadn't known each other for long before he was arrested. But apparently, she was dating him while he was in prison. And now that they're reconnecting in person, they seem to hit it off. And they even get married in 2002, and then move from Florida to Tennessee. Sheila and Mike want a fresh start. Mike served time for fraud, and he is a major suspect in his wife's murder. His reputation is at rock bottom in Florida. In Tennessee, nobody knows them, and he and Sheila are working to distance themselves from their former lives. After the wedding, Sheila changes her name, dyes her hair blonde, and it's like she's an entirely new person. Mike is trying to put his old life of crime and his wife's murder behind him. So, at this point, 12 years have passed since Marlene's murder, and her husband has moved on. And the cops aren't any closer to solving this cold case. Another 15 years pass, and by 2017, Marlene's homicide has been reassigned to a cold case unit at the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. We've seen this happen before. Now that 25 years have passed, DNA technology has improved a lot. In fact, the unit thinks they finally have the tools to test the hairs recovered from the car in 1990. However, when they compare the hairs to a sample from Mike, it's not a match. Obviously, this isn't much of a surprise. Like I mentioned before, the police knew Mike had a pretty solid alibi, so they didn't believe he actually committed the murder himself. But there's now another suspect on the radar. That suspect is Mike's new wife, Sheila. She knew him and Marlene starting about 5 months before the murder, and this is around the time Marlene thought Mike was starting an affair, using work as an excuse. And Sheila worked at the company they owned. People say that even back then, Sheila irrationally hated Marlene. I mean, yeah, she's her boss, but it's odd that Sheila married Mike so soon after he was released from prison. And it gets weirder. At some point after Sheila and Mike got married, they opened a business together. One year, Sheila attended the company party dressed as a clown, which is really strange given her husband's previous wife was murdered by someone in a clown costume. That's just plain insensitive. In addition, Marlene also believed the affair partner was Sheila. She just couldn't prove it. Sheila was the stereotypical younger, prettier woman. Marlene was 40 and Sheila was just 27. And, more importantly, Mike and Sheila were very flirty and inappropriate with one another at work. All of the colleagues thought it seemed like something was going on, not just Marlene. Plus, investigators talked to the people who lived in Sheila's apartment complex back in 1990, and many of them say they had seen Mike over at Sheila's place, not just once or twice. He came over a lot. Like, he came over so often that people actually just assumed he was the boyfriend who lived there. Even though Mike and Sheila insist they never saw each other while Marlene was alive, everyone, pretty much, including police, believe otherwise. Even evidence suggests otherwise. And once police have Sheila on their radar, they start finding other evidence against her. Now, remember the clown had balloons and flowers in their hands while walking up to Marlene's house? The balloons were still there by the time the crime scene investigators arrived, and they were pretty unique. There was only one store in the entire region that sold this type of balloon, and that store was half a mile away from Sheila's apartment. And when her and Mike moved to Tennessee and she dyed her hair blonde and gave herself a makeover, before that, Sheila had dark brown hair and brown eyes, and she stands at 5'7", which matches the description the worker at the costume shop gave. So, this is enough for police to get a warrant to collect a DNA sample from Sheila in 2017. And when they compare her hair with the strands from the car the murderer used, it's a perfect match. On September 26, 2017, the officers arrest Sheila for the 1990 murder of Marlene Warren. They charge her with first-degree murder, except Sheila says she can explain all of this. First, she insists there could be a perfectly innocent explanation for how her hair ended up in the clown's getaway car. After all, when Sheila worked at the used car lot, one of her responsibilities was repossession. If someone stopped paying their bills, Sheila would sometimes go find the car that wasn't being paid for and drive it back. So naturally, if that car ever got repossessed in the past, she could have at one point sat in the car and shed her hair. She also says she doesn't trust DNA tests. After all, it's been 25 years since the murder, and since the hair was found in the Chevy, that's a long time for evidence to sit in storage. And when her lawyer digs into records, they say they're not convinced the detectives handled the samples correctly. There were several occasions where the DNA could have been cross-contaminated or tampered with. The police do acknowledge this. They admit they made some mistakes over the years. They stored the hairs in evidence bags that weren't always properly sealed. It would be very easy for a hair from one bag to drift to another, but the state still says that even if you ignore the DNA, the circumstantial evidence against Sheila is strong. She matches the description of the killer. She had a motive given she was having an affair with Mike, and she could have easily bought the costume, the balloons, and the flowers, and then shot Marlene. Now, in spite of this, Sheila and her lawyer are both clear. When all this is going down, they say she is innocent. In fact, they say she has no history of violent crime. They say she doesn't have it in her to just show up and kill someone, and that she wouldn't be able to act so calm like the clown did when walking away. She wouldn't be able to just walk away after shooting someone in the face. Sheila fights the charges because she says she couldn't be convicted of a murder that she did not commit. By April 25th, 2023, Sheila is singing a different tune. I need you to know that back in 2017, Sheila was charged, and for the past 6 years, she hasn't gone to trial yet. So her lawyer's attempts to get the DNA evidence thrown out were still taking time, and this whole time, Sheila was sitting in jail. There doesn't seem to be any end in sight, and she's sick of waiting behind bars without a chance to defend herself. And she gets an apparent lifeline when the prosecutors offer her a plea deal. The terms are that if Sheila pleads guilty to second-degree murder, her sentence will only be 12 years. And when considering time served, that means she would only have another 6 years behind bars, and she'll be eligible for parole much earlier than that. Marlene accepts the deal, and just a year and a half later, November of 2024, she's released early for good behavior, meaning she only spent 7 years in prison for a murder conviction because of time served. Now, although she pled guilty, Sheila still maintains to this day that she's innocent and she served time in prison wrongfully. She's only accepted the deal because it was the quickest way for her to get released. And some people actually believe her. They think an innocent woman lost 7 years of life for a crime she didn't commit. Many of these people actually think Mike was responsible. After all, he seemed to have been thinking about her murder for much longer, even before meeting Sheila. Honestly, at this point, we will never know if the police ignored other credible suspects or if Sheila took the fall for Mike. Perhaps they plotted this together, or maybe she is guilty on her own. She just wanted to get rid of the wife and got a slap on the wrist. Whatever stance you take, it's fair to say a lot of people aren't happy with how this case played out. And Marlene never really got any justice either. She was gunned down in her own home in front of her son, and her family fought for justice for years. They never really got it. The family also thinks this case is exceptionally cruel because everyone knew Marlene's love of clowns, and she was gunned down by one of the things she loved. And even though Sheila pled guilty, she still maintains her innocence. This has been The Evidence Locker. This podcast is written and hosted by me, Shay, and edited by my husband, Toby. Thank you for listening. Please like and leave a review and give us a follow. It really helps us to keep researching cases like this. Listen next week as we open another locker. Stay curious, stay safe.